Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has confirmed he's had a, quote, long and meaningful call with the Chinese President Xi Jinping. Zelenskyy wrote on Twitter that he had hoped the call would give impetus to the development of bilateral relations. Now, this is the first call between the two leaders since the start of the war in Ukraine. Chinese state media are reporting that Xi told Zelenskyy talks and negotiation were the only way to end the conflict. China is seen as a key player regarding any moves towards peace because of its close relationship with Russia. And we can get the very latest on this from Kyiv, where our correspondent Roman Goncharenko is standing by, and from journalist Fabian Kretschmer, who's in Beijing. Roman, this call was initially expected to take place at the end of March. It's the first time we've been hearing the Ukrainian and Chinese leaders have spoken since Russia's invasion. Why did this call happen today?
Well, we can only speculate, but Ukraine has been actually waiting for this call for over a year, since the start of the Russian invasion in February 22. There are two important events that one lies behind us and one is ahead of us. One behind is that scandal or criticism of Chinese ambassador to France, who seemed to question Ukraine's independence and independence of other former Soviet republics. There was a lot of criticism in Central Europe of his remarks, and China distanced itself from those remarks. And maybe China was trying to push forward and to not to lose its role and its important role as a very big and important country, also in this conflict. And the second event lies ahead of us, and this is a much expected Ukrainian offensive. And some experts here say that to call for peace talks and a ceasefire just ahead of a major offensive could be a bit problematic for Ukraine, but nothing of that we hear from Ukrainian authorities. They stress that it is very important, and it is indeed very important that President Zelenskyy and the Chinese leader have spoken. Finally, we will see what will come out of it. It is very important that China will send an envoy to Ukraine. This is something that Ukraine has been asking and calling for months now.
Fabian, the US has warned China clearly against providing lethal aid to Russia. Is this phone call a sign that China won't now send weapons to Russia?
Well, Xi Jinping, China's head of state, already made that promise relatively straightforward when French President Emmanuel Macron and Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission, visited Beijing recently. That was already quite credible. And I think to understand this call from the Chinese perspective, it is a clear sign towards the European Union to give them a diplomatic concession. Xi Jinping has promised to call with Zelenskyy when the time is right, actually several times, and notably he did not give that promise towards the Americans. It was clearly to the Europeans. And this call has produced, in my opinion, two concrete results. One, as already mentioned, is the special envoy of Eurasian affairs that China will send to Ukraine, and which will also hold in-depth talks to work towards a political solution for this crisis. And then secondly, the humanitarian assistance that China will send. However, some main parts of China's positions have not changed. I mean, China still refrains from criticizing Putin and also calling this a war. China still talks about the Ukraine crisis. So the rhetoric overall has not changed fundamentally.
Roman, that leads me nicely to the question I wanted to ask you. China remains Moscow's most important ally. As Fabian was just saying, it's refused to call Russia's attack on Ukraine an invasion. Yet Ukraine has been very careful not to antagonize China, and Zelenskyy has been pushing for this call with Xi. Can you explain to us how Ukraine views China?
Well, China is very important for Ukraine. It's a very important country economically, militarily. It's a member of the Security Council, the UN. And Ukraine remembers that just a few weeks before the Russian invasion, there was a declaration between Russia and China about very close partnership. Ukraine also remembers that China didn't condemn Russia for invading Ukraine, and that during the votings in the UN, China refrained from condemning Russia. There were several attempts, on the other hand, Ukraine understands that if it wants Russia to pull back, to stop this war, it needs China, it needs Chinese support. So Ukraine was hoping for this conversation to happen. Ukraine had to wait for a very long time, but now this happened, and things could start moving finally in the direction that Ukraine would like them to move towards a cessation of hostilities. But Ukraine is not ready for a ceasefire on Russian conditions, and it will be very difficult to find a diplomatic solution for that. We are maybe at the beginning of a very long diplomatic road.
Roman Goncharenko in Kyiv and Fabian Kretschmer reporting from Beijing. Thanks so much to you both.